All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Man, that was like the longest 30 seconds of my life. And I'll tell you why. Tell you why. Because I'm here with my new friend, Paul Muller, and we came on a few minutes early and we started to talk about what we're going to talk about. But of course, we quickly stopped talking about what we're going to talk about and just started talking about it. And then all of a sudden we realized, oh, we were already doing it and we haven't even gotten to 10 o'clock yet. So this is a little bit like when you come back from the commercial break at on a talk show and like they've been talking the whole time, you had to watch commercials. So we've been talking about all kinds of stuff about enterprise digital transformation and innovation, but and we're going to get back to that because we were on a great stream. But before let me introduce Paul, who's joined us today. I got to know Paul because he was I was on a podcast that he's doing with an awesome Australian company named ASG, and he can tell us a little about that if he likes. And but he has many years of experience as a senior executive with Hewlett Packard. Subsequent to that, he has now been a man about town, digital expert, globe trotting, and working with many companies on all their digital stuff. So, Paul, why don't you just give us a little background on who you are and what you want us to know?
Yeah, look at Howard, and as you point out, the minute you and I start talking, we just tend to go on, right? We've kindred spirits, as it were. My background is I'm a reformed nerd. So dirty little secret, I still am a nerd. I just hide it. I started out in the high tech industry about 25 years ago in a startup. I literally did everything as you do in a startup, from helping ship products through to debugging and testing, through to taking phone calls and whether it's support calls or sales calls. You do it all, right, in a startup, which is great. Then moved from that really nimble startup through to one of the very, very strange company, Unisys, which you might know is a tech company that's formed out of like three ancient tech companies. That was a real change of scenery for me. It went from really fast-paced and agile to really, really slow and bureaucratic. And then I was blessed to join the HP organization, the original Silicon Valley startup, and got back into being able to do some amazing things. Did that for 20 years across Australia, Asia Pacific, and eventually moving to Silicon Valley, where I was the global vice president of strategic marketing for their software business. And we took that business from about $150 million a year when we started through to about $4.5 billion when we eventually spun it out a couple of years ago. And that's when I left and decided to hang up my shingle, as it were, and start working with organizations. And it's been a blast. It's great to be able to move between different organizations. I'm sure you find the same thing, and just
absolutely
get a sense of what people are doing. So that was my long-winded, short introduction.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And it makes me want to ask you, you mentioned the challenge of going from a startup to Unisys and what sounds like kind of a bureaucratic environment. I know that can be very challenging when you're trying to drive innovation. And then you went to HP, which, of course, is another very large organization with, of course, an amazing heritage of innovation. Although, frankly, there's a lot of companies that have an amazing heritage of innovation. But if you looked at them today, you might not be so impressed. I mean, Kodak had an amazing heritage of innovation, right?
Yeah.
In its day. Yeah. So I'm curious, did you find it was different? Because you obviously drove tremendous growth and success. So I read between the lines from that things must have been somewhat different at HP than, or if I speak Australian, I'll say HP.
There you go. Well done, mate. I like that.
But
yeah, look, it was. I mean, and so one of the things about that company that, and look, it has been through a tremendous amount of change in itself in the last 5 to 10 years, which it's hard to characterize its entire 60 years existence with a single sweeping statement. But organizationally, it was really built as a series of small companies working inside a larger corporate structure. And in that regard, each of the business units was given its own P&L. It was given its own right to innovate. In many cases, compete with other parts of the business itself, which led to some interesting dynamics. But that Silicon Valley innovator DNA was deep inside the organization, and it's where I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time looking at everything from new product introduction, category creation. And frankly, and I think one of the things I'd love to talk about today is the challenges in translating a new idea into market success, because we hear about all the market successes, but the failures usually outnumber them 10 to 1, and they're just as instructive, and in some cases, more powerful than the successes. If for no other reason, they teach you how and where value can be created and destroyed. And sorry, the last point I wanted to make is I was blessed to take on board a global role, because it is incredibly easy to become myopic about what you think the market is based on your cultural experience, and being able to go and travel, 20, 30 countries in a year and meet with clients who, interacted with their own customers and your products in really radically different ways, helped reframe a lot of my assumptions about what it meant to be a global citizen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, to your point earlier about how we seem to be kindred spirits, I mean, both things you just said, kind of, I see a common thread, which is the opportunity now where you work with lots of companies to see that kind of diversity. And then when you were at HP, your opportunity within one company, but it sounds like it was really many companies in many ways within HP, like you say, to travel and see different markets and everything. I'm like that too. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about HP. I'm a collector of what works, because like you say, 90% of products fail. So many enterprises that try to drive, transformation fail. So what I'm always going is, okay, but it's working somewhere. And even if it's only 10%, where's it working? And what are they doing? What's the secret to success? And so I always like to collect those things and try to study what those are. So I heard, at least with respect to HP, one certainly was that they had a more nimble, sort of separated structure. So they weren't necessarily making decisions as a monolith. Was there anything else that you took from HP that you'd say, yeah, when you're consulting with other large companies that are having the challenges of transformation, and we know there are so many, where you'd say, well, here's something else HP's doing, maybe you should consider this?
Yeah, look, I think for me, watching what didn't work and contrasting that, I should say, with what did work, there were a couple of things that became really apparent. One that won't be any surprise to you is the persistence of vision of great leadership, not just setting a set of transformational or aspirational goals, but the bloody-minded, if I could put it that way, persistence to wake up every morning, not just for the next quarter or for the next year, but for the next 2, 3, 4 years, and continue to inspect and reflect on the same set of priorities, and to really build that into the DNA and change the people through consistency, right? Consistency, persistence, it's pretty straightforward. That was definitely one of the big things. I think a lot of the failures we had, you could put down to, I think, people having the right idea. I once made this observation. I never met a strategy that wasn't a great one. Almost every strategy was, I qualify it, but I think every strategy I ever saw was actually pretty decent. It was the inability to persist with that usually was the difference between success and failure. Some people just went, the market's not moving as quickly as I want to, and they blame their idea rather than, or the market, rather than the fact that perhaps they just hadn't been at it long enough. I mean, just because the people in your, immediate vicinity know about your idea doesn't mean the world's heard about it yet, right? There's 7 billion of us, there's 10 of you. It takes a lot of persistence, right?
Absolutely.
Look, and the other, frankly, is great people. I mean, it sounds silly, but surrounding yourself with really solid people is one of the things that I think is a standout. Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, no. This is the gold that I'm looking for. So this is great. I think that persistence point, I remember I wrote an article a few years back on an interview that I'd heard Tony Robbins do, actually, with, and I forget the names, but it was one of the people who'd founded Skype and one of the people who'd founded Airbnb. And they had a very similar story, which is they both spent about 3 years in complete wasteland, like zero revenue, no reason to think this was going to work other than the kind of sheer persistence that you're talking about. And we do tend to have this experience of, well, we didn't hear about them then, so because they were unsuccessful. And all of a sudden, something starts to take off and hits that hockey stick curve. And you're like, God, I only heard about this thing a month ago, and now everyone's talking about it. It's an overnight success. No, you just heard about it when it started to become an overnight success. And even some companies like the mythology of being an overnight success, because that makes you sound like you're the hottest thing, instead of, no, but everyone ignored us for 4 years and now you're paying attention. Like, that's not good marketing, So that story gets brushed under the rug, but it's harmful then when you're that person going, man, Skype was an overnight success. Airbnb, one of my favorite things they talked about, and I didn't know this, was they were having so little success. Like they get like $1,500 of revenue a month. They'd rent like 2 places a month. Like, it was like practically nothing. And at one point they needed money. And this was during the election between Obama and McCain. Yeah. And so to make money, because they also had design skills, they decided to make funny cereal boxes of, they made like Obama O's, right?
Oh,
And
no
some
way.
kind of equivalent for McCain. And then what they did was, for the Obama O's, they designed this funny box with Obama, like a cartoon of Obama on it, all that, right? It wasn't anti-Obama or pro-Obama. It was just like Obama O's, just like you'd have Tony the Tiger. And then they had these boxes made, like at Kinko's or whatnot. And then they went to the grocery store and they just bought Cheerios. You have Cheerios in Australia?
Yeah. Well,
so
we don't, but I get, we've got something.
You know how a cereal will have like that inner lining with the actual cereal? So they just took out that part, threw away the Cheerios box, put it in their Obama O's box, and they sold them for like $15, right? Because it was a novelty, right? And this was how they funded continuing the persistence, because they had like no money to eat. They were eating like ramen noodles. So this was their little side gig while they were trying to get Airbnb going. Oh, you know what? Another one. I'm sorry, there were three.
No,
Airbnb,
please, I love them.
and Venmo. That was the other one.
Really?
And they all had the same story. It was a story of literally 3 years. And the funny thing is, it was 3 years for all of them. Exactly 3 years.
You know, and I'm not surprised though, because, and again, this is one of the things that I think is, I actually, you know, we joked about the overnight success thing, but it's actually one of the greatest frustrations as a sales and marketing executive as well, especially when you know, running marketing, when you're dealing with an executive who starts to buy into this idea that these companies appear and execute out of nowhere and suddenly, you know, build this great momentum, and it starts to impact expectations of how quickly transformative efforts or innovations are likely to take hold in the marketplace. And that's critical for a couple of reasons. Number one is it usually leads to an absurd set of sales expectations and targets, which, you know, tend to distract your field from what we're going to talk about customer love in a moment, right? Just because you've launched a product doesn't necessarily mean the customers love it. So, you know, you lose an important signal because your salespeople might be giving you great information, but you're trying to get them to sell you a bright idea that may not have been properly tested, number one. But number two is when they don't get that instant hit of results, they get strategy attention deficit disorder. Right? It's like, oh, we need another strategy then, right? And so you execute that for 3, 6, 9, 12 months. It's usually less than a financial year, because that tends to be when people, you know, look at the scorecards a little bit more acutely, and then they burn that and they're like, well, that idea was a bad idea. And I would argue, and you probably you may have a different point of view on this, but your customers might have only just started to hear about this idea after 9 months, and you've just ripped it off the shelves just as they were getting ready to start to change their behaviors.
Right.
Yeah, a persistence of vision, I think, is one of the critical elements of this. I mean, it's really rare to get an overnight success.
I absolutely think that's true. And there's a funny dialectic about that, though, which is that, you know, like a pull in two different directions. By which I mean,
I understand. So
you gave me a funny look, like, right.
Yeah.
So, like, what I see. Anyway, so because, you know, when you give advice, you hear advice for like people in startups. What are the two most common things you hear? One, persist in your vision. Don't take rejection seriously. Don't let them tell you no. And what's the other? Pivot. Be flexible. Be agile. Right. Respond to the market. Right. Well, then it's like, well wait a minute. So if I put a product in the market and it's not immediately working, do I persist or do I pivot? Those are opposite things to do. Right. And well, that's the art of it, right? That's maybe why if there was only one direction and you could say, follow this one thing and you will definitely be successful, then probably more people will be successful. But I think this is one of the challenges, is to know when to persist or when to pivot or how much to pivot, you know, because of course you can be running, you know, endlessly towards something that nobody wants, selling ice to Eskimos, or you could be needing to persist to get that market awareness. And I mean, do you have any tips for somebody who's going, okay, well, how do I know the difference?
Look, it's a great question. And I was finally going to say, I know this guy who's written a book that starts with understand your customers is one of his first principles. You know this guy? He's Howard Tiersky. Great guy, written a great book.
I wouldn't believe a word that guy says.
No.
I heard he made that whole book up while sitting on his deck one summer.
Well, hopefully that's the case, because, you know, that would be a great overnight success, right?
Well, there you go. It was the summer of 2014, but anyway, no, just joking.
Yeah, well, that's all right. But in all seriousness, I think that you know, part of it is frankly, having understanding your customer, I think, is one of the things you talk about. And I think it's one of the reasons you and I get along so well, I think, is because you've distilled down 20 years of my experience into, you know, a couple of 100 pages, which I'm not sure if I should feel great about that or feel like maybe I didn't accomplish enough.
If it's any consolation, it is almost 400 pages. So
there you go. There you go. You can read me like a book, people. But in all seriousness, I think one of the things that you talk about is a really important point. It's one of the questions that I always used to ask, which is, okay, I know we've got our idea of what we think the market wants, but that's based on our perception and often on asking the customer what they want. And I think one of the great insights for success with this is actually goes to the root of the innovation process in and of itself, which is, rather than come up with what you think the customer's problem is, why don't you go and just watch how they behave a day in their life? Because you may have spent a ton of time thinking about a problem and solving a problem that they may actually have, but more likely than not, they don't perceive to be a problem. They don't ascribe commercial value to it. And no matter how polished it is, it's never going to get used. And I think one of the great misnomers, I think, is the overnight success, right? And the other is the brilliantly insightful engineer or executive who somehow manages to intuit the needs of all of their customers without ever watching them work.
Right.
And I think that's a great one of the great failings of this. So I think start with, I hate to say good data because people immediately think I mean hard data in the sense of, you know, you've got to have your analytics in place. Data can be observational, as you point out, actually, funnily enough, in the book, is go and just watch people do their jobs. And if you can see a more effective and efficient way of solving that, whether it's with technology or however you might do that, you know, you've potentially created value for those people. And that's critical. I think start with watching your customers.
Well, I think that's a great answer to my question, because what I hear you saying really is, if you're trying to figure out whether your lack of success is a situation where you should persist or a situation where you should pivot, one thing to do is do customer research and figure out, does somebody love this product? Because, you know, if I've got 10, you know, mothers of, you know, children with learning disabilities or whatever my target market is, who absolutely love this product, and I know there are millions of them out there, and my strategy and my problem is, how do I get them? That's one thing. But if it's a product for mothers with children with learning disabilities, and, you know, I've had 30, 40, 50 of them look at it, consider it, play with it, but nobody's really interested in it. I've got nobody. Sometimes the difference between 1 or 2 people who like it, 1 or 2 great customers and 0, is a huge difference. Because if you can't find anybody that likes it, it's probably time to pivot. If you found some people, but you just can't grow it enough, now you have a marketing and awareness problem, assuming that there exist more people like the people that love it.
One of my first diagnostics I have with organizations that are struggling with obtaining success is exactly that. They'll talk to me and it's like, I need more customers, I need more this, I need more that. And I'm like, okay. And they'll want to get onto ideating solutions. And I'm like, okay, let's pause. There's only one person whose opinion matters in this, and that's the 3 or 4 or 5 people who've actually bought what it is you do. And one of my first questions, I said, I need to talk to those people. What do you want to ask them? I want to ask them, who dies if I take this away from you now that you've got it? Who suffers if I take this away from you? Why don't you want me to take this away from you? Because if they can give me good reasons as to why they don't want to lose it, I've got the beginning of my marketing campaign, of my value proposition. Because there is another thing I've discovered is a lot of the time they might have built a great product, but they don't actually understand the value that it's being put to versus the value that they thought they were building. So they've got a messaging problem. And again, ask your existing customers, as you point out, that's a really good test for, do I pivot or do I persist? Is if you've got people who are laying down on the train tracks going, no way, are you taking this thing away from me? Or, you know, going back to the old way or whatever it might be, right? You know, you've got something.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
I'm going to give you a great example, actually, because I think one of these is, you know, this is one that that I think will resonate hopefully with most of you. If I said I'm going to take away pin and chip cards, that tap to pay type capability. I mean, I was in the United States 10 years ago. They were still using those clicky clacky credit card machine things. I thought I'd gone back to like the Flintstones era. It was bizarre. But this, you know, if you said to me, take away the tap to, I'd be like, what are you? No way. But it had been resisted for a tremendous period of time. ATMs, another classic thing, right? When they first arrived, no one wanted to use them. Now it's like, oh, we're taking away the ATMs. There'd be a riot. So I think that was an example of where persistence was really important. If you'd given up because of a lack of adoption, you would have completely missed the market.
You know, that's a great point, and actually it makes me think of something that I've been thinking about lately about COVID, which is, I'll tell you my own story about.
You think it's just not caught on yet?
Yeah, you just got to give it time. Eventually, people will come to love it. The tap to pay. So I was not a user of tap to pay.
Really?
No, and to me, the reason was because most of the credit card terminals around here at stores, they have the thing where you can stick the card in, right? So not the swipe, right? Now, and even when I saw the thing tap to pay, but I had a habit, right? My habit was I stick the card in, and I had very little pain associated with that habit. So it was just not a priority, and I gave it zero thought. And if someone had ever said to me, "Why aren't you using tap to pay?" I would have been like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not against it, but like, I'm not thinking about it. I'm multitasking and I'm checking out, and I just stick my credit card in. And what's the big deal? Then COVID. And all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know if I want to stick my credit card into this thing that other people's credit cards have been in, you know, where they may have their germs on and all that, you know? So all of a sudden I become hyper aware of what am I touching and what is my credit card touching? And all of a sudden I'm like, hey, I think I can just wave it near the terminal. And isn't there a thing up there like that? And I'm telling you, this is 4 months ago, 6 months ago, right? Yeah. Way late, but I just had no reason to adopt it, you know? And I think that is a pattern we see with COVID all around. And I'm actually working on another thing I'm going to write about Dr. Seuss. See, I always like to make these, you know, strange. We've gone from tap to pay to COVID to Dr. Seuss. So I assume in Australia that still people read Dr. Seuss, Green Eggs and Ham. Is that right?
I do not like them, Sam. I am.
Exactly. So that's a story about a guy who doesn't want it and doesn't want it. And by the way, anytime I hire a business development person, I always buy them a copy of that book. Because to me, it is the ultimate sales book. The guy's like, I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. And then finally, the end. And I tear up. When he says, say, I do like these green eggs and ham. And then he says, after all that, thank you. Thank you, Sam, I am. Right? So true. But see, I see you're tearing up too, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. It reminds it's actually, you know, it's such a powerful thing. And, you know, I think overcoming, whether it's, you know, customer inertia, because ultimately when you're taking a new product out to market or a new offering service out to market, you're trying to overcome two forms of inertia: the buyer's or consumer's inertia, because they're used to doing what they did the day before. And societal norms and behavioral norms carry with them a tremendous amount of inertia. And it is really, you know, force equals mass times acceleration, right? When you've got a big mass of people, right? Yeah. A big mass of behaviors, changing that requires a huge counterforce, or you apply a small force over a long period of time, right? Yeah. And that's also true, that behavior, I think, is also true of your people. Is they'll want to keep selling the way they sold before. I mean, imagine introducing the ATM into the bank. What's that going to do? It's going to take away my job. There'll be people from the inside fighting the status quo. And you've got to remember, and this is probably more important for a large organization than it is for a small one, when it comes to this whole pivot discussion, is how much of my failure is due to the fact that my own people either don't understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, or believe that this is going to cause their existing power base or structure, personal or organizational, to be eroded, and therefore they're going to either passively or actively resist it.
Right.
And again, we often look to the market and go, the reason we're not succeeding is the market. But I've seen countless examples of where, you know, competing priorities internally meant that there were one group of people who were quite actively trying to sabotage the other because it meant the end of them.
Absolutely. You know? And why wouldn't they, right? Doesn't that just make complete sense, right?
Well, you know what, just a very quick example that most of the listeners, I imagine, heard about was when they went to release the iPhone. The product manager for the iPod's like, okay, yeah, we'll do this product, but we've got to take the music player out of the phone, right? Because, you know, it'll cannibalize the sales of the iPod. And, you know, Jobs is reportedly, and, you know, Steve has a lot of things credited to them and may or may not be true, but this one sounds believable, so I'll share it. When either we do it or someone else is going to do it. So, you know, we do it to ourselves and we own that change rather than let somebody else, you know, bring the change upon us. And I think that's that organizational dynamic is a difficult one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to harken back to what you said before about pain, where you said, let's find out what kind of pain do you feel if I take away this new product to really understand how important it is. I think there's an opportunity to do the flip side, which is to understand how, if the product is one that solves pain, whether it's an internal pain solution, like it increases the revenues, or it addresses a pain that the call center people have, or pain for customers, of course, that you have, that is another metric to say, if you're trying to accelerate, again, take my tap to pay, all of a sudden, a product that really wasn't solving a pain. I had no pain, so I wasn't using tap to pay. But now all of a sudden I had pain. And when you can, because of COVID and because of my fear of germs, I wasn't worried about germs before that. I would have thought I was crazy to be worried about sticking my credit card in a thing. Like, what am I, a germaphobe? But now all of a sudden, so that's, and by the way, that's something that can happen sometimes too, right? If you're trying to launch a product that the market's not taking up, sometimes you can get a little lucky and something will change, something will shift, some new need will develop, right? A natural disaster can occur.
Look at Zoom.
What? Yeah,
look at
100%, right? And the
household
longer,
name.
absolutely,
no one knew who they were a year ago.
Yeah, and the longer you persist, the more likely something lucky is to happen. You know what I mean? It's like, if I just wait long enough, I'll get lucky. Well, that's probably not like a complete strategy in and of itself, but it's one thread in, the persistence thing.
Yeah.
I
think you've got to be clear about, I think this is where stakeholder management with your investors is really important. Before you kick off that innovation, is getting clear about what the framework for the return on investment needs to look like. And again, it's really easy to make sweeping generalizations, and I do it myself all the time. And then, as a business owner myself, I then check myself thinking, well, hang on, how would I react to my own advice? But genuinely speaking, when you're building your success plan for that innovation, having some absurd ROI period of like 6-9 months when you've paid it all back, I don't think many VCs expect I don't think that many VCs expect to not be putting money in after 2 years, right?
Most
of them,
I'll be writing their eyes if you show them that, right?
Yeah, I'll be writing checks for the next 3 to 4. So why the heck inside an existing enterprise do you think you can defy the laws of commerce? I mean, if you're that, sorry, I'm going to swear, if you're that bloody good, then
why aren't you Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, you should be rolling in billions, right? But the reality is there's no such. I don't think there's any fast paths to successful innovation here. I think occasionally people get lucky, but I think even that's probably mythologized. I suspect that they were probably very deliberate and were disciplined.
Well, on last week's, and it was earlier this week, I had another guest, and we were talking about the golf story about that woman who, the very first time she played golf, hits a hole-in-one on the first hole, right? So, anything's possible, but that can't be your strategy, right? We're just going to get crazy lucky.
Give a monkey a typewriter and they might do Shakespeare.
But I think you're absolutely right about all this. But the one thing I think is, okay, so you go into your board or to your CEO with this big new idea and you say, look, here's the plan. For 3 years, just like Venmo, just like PayPal, just like Skype, we're going to have no revenue. We're going to suffer. Nobody's going to know who we are. It's going to be the flat part of the hockey stick. Right. But don't worry, because in year 4, we're going to have an inflection point. Right. Yeah. So my question to you is the only way to get things funded in corporate America to just lie like crazy and then hope to get lucky later?
It's a great question and one I think about a heck of a lot because, there are a bunch of people I know who would say, no, we've got to show a crazy good return. We've got to make everyone feel that this is doable. And then once they're committed to the idea, financially committed, you rely on a trait of human psychology called loss aversion, where people value a loss more highly than they do a gain, and just get them to continue to plow in. But again, I think that that's both cynical and, frankly, I think if that's what you got to do to get the idea floated, you're probably not. You don't have a group of backers who've got that persistence of vision to begin with. You might get lucky here that they are foolish enough to continue to believe the narrative, and invariably you'll find a string of executives, being thrown out as they fail to meet these unrealistic expectations.
Exactly. The
so no, I don't think it is. What about you? Do you think that? Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I just want to say the aversion to loss principle applies to the investment, but not to the person.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, they're happy to fire the person and say, well, that guy lied to us, but now that we've invested, we can't lose our money. So now we're going to hire someone else who's going to come in and say, oh, that guy was crazy. I can't believe he told you you'd have a return in 18 months or in 9 months. I'm going to need another 9 months. And then you're going to have your return, and then that guy's going to get fired. I mean, that's the story. Isn't that the story we see over and over? So unfortunately, it may be that lack of persistence of vision that you describe characterizes the management of most large legacy enterprises.
So I've got to ask you the question. I mean, you obviously deal with a lot of organizations too, and it's a little more sensitive for you, I suspect, because you may be working with some at the moment who may or may not meet these criteria. So we're talking about fictitious people now, right, Howard?
Yes, absolutely.
But when you get brought in, have you noticed? Well, I guess one, who brings you in? Why do they bring you in? And do you have a sense of your own view on what the timeframes are that their expectations are for these sorts of returns?
Yeah, in our case, it's a little different because while our goal is always to drive a successful business outcome, we're actually not brought in for the whole. Usually we're not being hired to build a business for somebody. We're being hired to develop the strategy or to design the user experience or something like that. I'm getting a note from StreamYard. Are you having a hard time seeing or hearing me? I'm getting your video is not.
No, it's going fine. Actually, okay. I've just got.
All right. I had a little glitch on my end, but maybe it was fine. So in any case, So bottom line is, we don't really see it because we're not. Our role is usually come in and help get something going or define a strategy. Not necessarily, we're not the ones saying we're promising you this return in period of time or whatever. That's more the internal role, I think, or of course, if you're in a startup. But Kevin got in the nudge from Caitlin. I realize we are nearly at the end of our time. But it occurs to me, well, two things. One is this. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, as we knew it would be, and we were having a conversation with the person who produces your podcast, who's awesome, and who I know was very thinking about, okay, we need to make sure we're prepared because Paul and I are giving a presentation briefing to a bunch of very senior executives together in a few weeks, or maybe it's next week, or I don't know, maybe it's this afternoon. I can't remember. Hopefully
it's 3 weeks from now.
Okay, fantastic. So, and part of we said we need to spend some time to prepare, and I have a feeling that maybe Paul and I were both thinking, I'm not sure how much preparation we needed, but of course, the folks who are organizing it, they want to feel like we're prepared. So that's why we decided, well, we're prepared, but we'll do this because then we're live casting for all of you, and we're also preparing. But it got me thinking before this about the idea of preparation, and because there's and it was funny. I was talking to someone who works for me recently as well about a big presentation that she has to give and how you prepare. And some people when they're not used to doing a lot of that kind of stuff, they want to write everything down, they want to script everything out, they want to know exactly what they're going to say. And of course, there's a big challenge of that, which is then you're not really being spontaneous. You're not really interacting with the audience. You're not dealing with the moment. And usually that doesn't come across well. But on the flip side, if you just wing it, you just totally come in unprepared and figure, well, I'll stand up there and something will occur to me. Well, it might not, right? You might just come across like with nothing. So that kind of gave me a thought. And it's also with a little bit of dash of things I've learned from being in Tony Robbins' world. I think there's three types of preparation. Gotcha. And so here, and I was thinking this, I would start this, but now instead I'm going to end with this because I think we really have done one of them and not the other. And I think that's fine. So I think the three types of preparation are, one type of preparation is to know exactly what you're going to say. What's the outline? What's the structure? It's like when the president gives a teleprompter speech and he reads the speech, right? That's one style of preparation. And it has pros and cons, right? Highly predictable, but obviously tends to be kind of flat. And we can tell when someone's speaking and they're just reading or they're not really interacting with us. So that's not what I prefer to do. Although, there are circumstances when maybe that's the thing to do. Then I think the second type of preparation is the preparation that you do all the time. Because someone said to me, well, Howard, I noticed this was the same person who was asking me about preparing and scripting everything. And they said, you seem to just go into things all the time and you just make it up. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of true. But on the flip side, I spend hours every week listening to podcasts, reading books, talking to people, learning. So there's this preparation that we do that's continuous. And, you know, so that then when, you know, I was joking earlier, I just sat down and made up a book, but, you know, well, not exactly, you know, I spent years and years and years, not just interacting, but collecting, you know, like we were talking about before, really trying to learn. And then I think the third type of preparation is the preparation you do right before something. And this is the part that I really learned from Tony Robbins, which is two things: physiology and focus. First of all, make sure like you're well hydrated, you're well rested, you know, you're upright, you're ready to go, you have energy, you know, you're ready to engage with something, you're in a great mindset. And then secondly, to go, well, what's my outcome here? What am I really trying to accomplish? Not what's everything I'm going to say and do, but like, if this is really successful at the end, what does it look like? And personally, I think that the answer to the seeming conundrum of if I script it all, it's flat, but if I don't, it's a mess, is the combination of kind of continuous learning in the area that you're engaged around, and just that moment of being like, okay, am I ready for this? And what am I trying to get to? So anyway, that was kind of my thinking, which made me think that you and I don't have to worry about the script or the agenda for next or 3 weeks from now, but just making sure that we know what we're trying to accomplish. And of course, we're both super prepared because we're speaking. And by the way, you know, if you said, hey, Howard, we want you to come in and talk about gardening, well, I would not be prepared at all. And I'd probably have to script it, right? Because I don't know nothing about that.
But funny you should mention that. So I just want to respond to that last comment, because I do a lot of public speaking coaching for folks who, you know, typically, you know, I'm sure you've had it. You get off stage and someone comes up to you and says, hey, I'm not a great public speaker. You are. Can you teach me what it is you do?
No, I've never had that happen to me. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am.
I'm sure you have. My advice is actually it's quite simple. Number one is remember you're there for them, they're not there for you. So just love your audience, because you know they'll respond to the fact that you care about their experience. There are a lot of arrogant speakers, but the other one is or self-interested speakers who I don't think are terribly good. But the other point I'd always say to them is it's actually incredibly simple. Just start with, keep in mind, what is the thing you're going to say last as you walk off stage? What is the one idea you want to leave them with as you walk off stage? And then open with the thing that summarizes the thing you're going to say at the end. And then all the bits in the middle just need to connect those two dots together. If you can remember what you're going to say when you walk off, then that's pretty much what you're going to say when you walk on. And then everything in between just needs to logically hang together. It's kind of a slightly different way of saying what you're talking about, which is what's that one concept you want to convey? And if you can straighten that out in your head, that's where the 20 years of experience becomes important, right? because you can find a story or a fact that ties back to your closing proposition. But again, people like yourself make it look oh so easy.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I would just emphasize, I think this is great advice for anyone who's listening. And I would just emphasize that even though Paul and I are blessed with 20 or however many years of experience is, you don't really need 20 years of experience. In fact, Caitlin, our producer, always tells me I go on too long. So it makes me think maybe I'd be better if I just had like 5 years of experience. You know, maybe I have too much experience and I've already passed the sweet spot, you know. But
not
in any
at
case, so you know, yes, you obviously need to be prepared what you're going to talk about, but you don't need 20 years of experience in order to be able to get up and give a podcast or talk or whatever else. So,
of course, that's very true. That's very true. It just makes it a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, right. Well, awesome, Paul. This is so fantastic. I'm so pleased and appreciative that you are on today. I'm looking forward to our session in a few weeks. I just feel like we could cover so much ground there as well. And if we cover the same ground or we cover totally different ground, either way, I'm confident it'll be awesome. So
I really loved it. I'd love to join you back again here one day, and of course have you back on the podcast because it was a lot of fun.
Wonderful. That sounds great. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for watching. If you have any questions for people who are watching this in the future, I'm always really a little bit nervous talking to the people in the future that are watching it. I'm kind of wondering like, what's it like, you know? Yeah. But anyway, feel free to put it in the comments under this and I'll take a look. And if Paul sees them, I'll probably do the same. And if you have any questions for us that you haven't asked during the session, feel free to type them there and we'll try to get to you. And thanks everybody.
If you haven't, check out the book. It is amazing.
All right. The book. I forgot about the book. Yeah. So, and if you want to get a free
it really is really great. Check it out.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have an awesome day.